King Lear is certainly a play that is renowned for its exploration of the human condition, while it runs the full gamut of emotion, relationships, and experiences that we might expect to encounter in our lives. The concept that looms largest is that of blindness and insight. From the opening, the power of truth and the complexity of the spoken word is highlighted as audiences, particularly those from today, feel a chill watching a ruler who expects and revels in flattery while driving away the two characters who speak frankly and truthfully to him. Shakespeare's use of the stylistic construction of the play to reveal the truth is no accident. Cordelia's insistent and persistent commentary on her sister's flattery is given through asides, which all audiences who are au fait with the dramatic device recognise as complete and unbridled truth. After all, Cordelia is not performing for anyone. Unlike the others on the stage who perform for each other in the court, she tells us the truth directly. Today we're going to focus on 3 learning goals. By the end of this video, you should be able to discerningly analyse Shakespeare's perspective on truth, insight and blindness, name and identify characterisation of those who engage in duplicitous practices as well as those whose veracity is unquestionable, and be able to speak and write confidently about the stylistic structures that Shakespeare employs to position audiences to understand his perspective on major concepts. So let's get into our analysis. Speaking truth to power has dire consequences in this play, as Lear's willfulness and refusal to take good advice breaks his country into warring factions and leads to the violent death of most of the characters and the entire royal family. Like Shakespeare's other major tragedies, Lear does not offer easy solutions to the familial, social, and political conflicts it presents, but it explores them with an unmatched depth of understanding and feeling. The concept of speech and truthfulness underscores the plot of King Lear. It shows us through a dramatic story the way that the words of the powerful and those addressed to the powerful may distort and conceal, bringing social and personal catastrophe. Similarly, the play shows that in the mouths of a courageous few, speech and truthfulness can lead to understanding and reconciliation. While there are many casualties in the play, the first casualty we see is truth. Because Lear wields absolute power in his ancient British kingdom, he can speak freely as he likes, and in old age he indulges himself and speaks impulsively and rashly. No one in the court feels free to respond frankly to him, and he reacts violently to implied or direct criticism. When he sweeps into court announcing that he will immediately divide the kingdom among his daughters, giving the largest share to whichever of them can speak most fulsomely of her love for him, everyone is astounded, but none contradict him. He says, "Know that we have divided in 3 our kingdom, and 'tis our fast intent to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we, unburdened, crawl toward death." The use of the definitive term "no" indicates Lear's stubborn and impulsive behaviour, reinforced of course by the term "fast," suggesting again that this is a hasty and fixed decision that none can stop. Truth's death is also apparent here, as audiences are made aware that Lear has already orchestrated his decision, and resultantly they can work out that he has already decided that Cordelia will draw, to quote him, a third more opulent than her sisters. While some critics suggest that this opening scene absolves Cordelia of any guilt in her father's demise, and indeed places it solely on her older sister's shoulders, the indication that she is his joy and valued more than the others, inherent through the financial diction that Shakespeare uses to indicate the value placed on her and not the elder sisters, it can be argued that Cordelia should know better. The jealous, performative and competitive nature of the love trial, as well as the sisters' quick reactions, tell us that this is not a new behaviour for the ageing king. So while the older sisters clearly hold little loyalty to anyone but themselves, can it be argued that Cordelia holds loyalty to her father? Or is her truth-telling now her first act of loyalty in some time? Certainly an argument to keep in mind and keep analysing. Let's get back to the love trial. To begin the love trial, Goneril and Regan utter almost ludicrously exaggerated protestations of how they adore their father and are rewarded. Cordelia, who will not play the game of flattery, and Kent, who tries to stop Lear from disinheriting her, are the only 2 who respond honestly and bravely to Lear about what he is doing. Cordelia's measured and sincere answer, reflecting critically upon the blandishments of her sisters, provokes Lear to denounce her and leave her penniless. He cries, "Thy truth then be thy dower." The irony in this statement, while lost on Lear, allows audiences to see that she is left with more than her sisters. Her truth, emphasised through the paradoxical term of nothing, meaning everything and naught, suggests that her dowry could hold many good unknowns. Equally, for both Christian Jacobean audiences and modern audiences, the notion of truth as something valuable and inherently good indicates that what Cordelia takes for her dowry, that is, the truth in her word, her veracity, should be enormously prized. A notion that is only reinforced as her goodness is privileged across the course of the play. Kent too attempts to make Lear see reason, imploring his king, who we're asked to assume he has served for the 80 years, to see better Lear, excusing his plain speaking by the seriousness of the situation. For his rash intervention, Kent is banished, but will not be silent, saying, "Whilst I can vent clamour from my throat, I'll tell thee thou dost evil." Lear's mistake is evident to audiences, but Lear's excessive pride and the fear he has instilled by banishing two of the court's most important and previously valuable members keeps the members of the court quiet. As the rest of the court leaves the stage at the end of the dramatic scene, Goneril and Regan linger and, revealing that their flattery was indeed false, begin at once to plan how they will subjugate and humiliate their supposedly beloved father. Interestingly, Shakespeare changes their speech to prose rather than the more formal verse, suggesting that their actions are not those of royals. The switching between prose and verse is also used here and throughout the play to mark the difference between truthful speech and flattery. In all of Shakespeare's plays, lower class characters speak prose while higher status characters speak verse. But here, verse also seems to be the language of deception, while prose is the language of honesty. So what does this mean? Perhaps audiences are invited to see, quite literally, just how hard it is to distinguish truth from lies, and resultantly how much sight one must have to ensure they are not blinded or blindsided by others. By the end of the first scene of the play, we have seen the exercise of power reducing most of the court to cowed silence, driving any vocal opposition away from the court and rewarding the dishonest and self-serving. The use of dramatic irony and the following unravelling of all that is good and ordered within the play indicates immediately that blindness is a negative trait. Following that, audiences are invited to see, especially those familiar with the Jacobean notion of the Wheel of Fortune that is mentioned both directly and indirectly throughout the play, that the wheel has turned and everything is upside down. Barring a few events, this opening scene foreshadows the chaos that will ensue when truth, insight, and moral obligation are ignored, and deceit, blindness, and a lack of loyalty are favoured. So that's the general structure. Let's move on to some specific characterisation. The fool appears somewhat later, but promptly begins his barbed teasing. The role of the fool in Shakespeare's play, as in late Renaissance and Elizabethan courts, is to use humour and foolery to amuse and sometimes offer oblique criticisms to the authority who employs him. The fool is by custom licensed to speak the truth that others may see but are too fearful of their own positions or safety to point out. The fool also acts as a mouthpiece to the audience, and the criticism that the fool offers invites audiences to take up a similarly critical position. After all, if someone whose place is so low in the court can see how foolish the king is being, then the king must no longer have the insight or intelligence to do so. Adding to the notion that the fool is to be believed, when threatened with the whip for his glancing references to Lear's having given the kingdom to his two false-speaking daughters and cut the honest Cordelia off with nothing, the fool observes that truth in the kingdom now must be kennelled and whipped, while flattery, the Lady Brack, may stand by the fire and stink. The olfactory imagery as well as the invective indicate just how foolish the king is being in being so blind to all of his mistakes. The fool's words are incredibly important to our understanding of the concepts of blindness and betrayal and the position that we're invited to take up. But so too is the fool as a dramatic device. The fool's mockery of Lear, evidenced through pun and repetition, helps audiences to criticise Lear. Shakespeare also continues the imagery of division, implying that the pairing of the country and mind will lead to nothing but evil and chaos. The humorous entry of Goneril after the fool's criticism only enhancing audiences' criticism of Lear's true blindness. Jokes often express harsh truths, obliquely or even directly, and the comedian may present in jest what would be considered libellous or outrageous if stated seriously. That Lear is not altogether a tyrant is shown in his tolerance and fondness of the fool, which allows him to glimpse what he is not yet ready to acknowledge, that he himself has been a fool, gulled by his rapacious daughters. It also helps to support the notion that some critics put forward, Lear was once a great king whose wearying age has allowed him to be tricked and made him truly come undone. The fool is not the only structural and stylistic device used to invite audiences to condemn deceit and chaos, though. In a truly Shakespearean criticism, the use of parallel plot indicates that Lear's blindness, while very much a folly of the king, can be a folly of anyone. The opening scene of Lear's blind vision of his kingdom is followed directly by another scene of a father and a brother deceived by false words, as the charming, covetous schemer, Edmund first persuades Gloucester that his older brother Edgar is planning to take Gloucester's life, convincing the trusting Edgar that their father has developed an irrational rage against him and he should flee at once, his flight then convincing the father of Edgar's guilt. Talking freely to himself and the audience, he justifies any practice that serves his own interests. The conman who can speak frankly about his practices when it suits him has a kind of pernicious charm. But Edmund's bold declaration in the soliloquy tells audiences that this world has turned upside down as a result of the blindness and lack of truth that has been allowed to fester. In the world of the play, those whose nature is so far from doing harms are not given permissible space to live when those in power have allowed the natural order to be overturned by being blind to the machinations of others. Not all the deceptive practices in King Lear, however, are undertaken from self-serving or evil motives. Kent, banished for his attempt to speak truth to power, disguises himself so that he can continue to serve King Lear in a humbler capacity. Clothing is an easy disguise and a well-used symbol throughout the play, but Kent thinks how he must also change his voice and words, saying, "If I other accents borrow, that can my speech diffuse my good intent may carry through." Though disguised in appearance and voice, he remains the honest, loyal follower who tried to restrain Lear's folly and now sticks with him during his misfortunes. The extremity of Kent's loyalty is only further enhanced by the violence implied in the word raised, which he uses to describe how he will take off his old appearance and put on this new one to benefit the king. As Caius, Kent's words are still blunt, even rash, but always truthful despite what they cost him, as when Regan has him and symbolically Lear put in the stocks. King Lear is a grim but not a nihilistic play. Kent is reunited with Lear in the final scene. Loyal to the end, he speaks some of the most moving lines of the play when another follower tries to call back the dying Lear. Kent says, "Vex not his ghost, oh let him pass, he hates him that would on the rack of this tough world stretch him out longer." Kent sees what the others cannot. The imagery of torture invited by the words rack and stretch him would play on the sensibilities of a Jacobean audience, allowing them to see that the punishment Lear has undergone is a form of penance and that his folly should be forgiven in some way. Kent himself later hears another imagined call. "I have a journey, sir, shortly to go. My master calls me, I must not say no." Here we see that Kent is a distinctive voice in the play, whether disguised or not, as he promises he can keep counsel and deliver a plain message bluntly. He is a standard in the play for honest speech. He speaks the truth as he sees it and bears the consequences willingly. At least in some part we can see that Shakespeare privileges this attitude, even if it is shown to come at great personal cost. Disguised speech is also used for moral purposes by Edgar. Edgar is able to accompany and protect his literally blinded father while pretending to be several different people by assuming other costumes and voices. Under his care, Gloucester recovers himself to the extent that he notices something different about Tom, questioning, "Methinks thy voice is altered, and thou speakst in better phrase and matter than thou didst." In one of the play's most poignant scenes, Gloucester asks his guide to lead him to a cliff's edge and then leave him. Edgar describes the dangerous height to which they have supposedly come, and when the old man steps, as he thinks, over the edge and falls, Edgar, in another voice, describes his remarkable fall and amazing recovery. It is a moving piece of theatre and a striking demonstration of how language, skillfully used, can manipulate reality and convince us against the evidence of our senses and our reason. It is a moment of pure redemption as a child who is indeed more sinned against than sinning, unlike Lear who actually says this line, offers a small redemptive act for his repentant father who fell into blindness. In a time of national crisis and family crisis such as we see in King Lear, Shakespeare shows us many ways in which speaking freely and speaking falsely can both lead to disaster. The final lines of the play are spoken either by the honest Duke of Albany, who has opposed his wife Goneril in her cruelty to her father, or Edgar, who has endured being cast out and slung low by his brother's lies and his father's blindness. The final lines urge the survivors to abandon all attempts at political expediency in the face of the devastation of both kingdom and royal family. In one of the most famous lines of the play, "Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say," audiences are invited to see that policy has failed almost everywhere, and the only possible response remaining is to speak the truth of compassionate feeling. Keep in mind that this play does not offer easy answers. The uncovering of lies and deceit in Gloucester's adulterous act and its product open the play, showing that this broken world is already long established. the falsity of the spoken word is then manipulated, misunderstood, weaponized, and used for moral purposes throughout the play. So perhaps it is not the words themselves that lead to blindness, but the moral character or deficit of it, as well as the purity of motivation that we find in each character, or not, which invites us to take up a positive position on truth, loyalty, and the importance of accuracy in speech. So now's the time to make yourself some notes. What is Shakespeare's perspective on truth, insight, and blindness? What words, phrases, aesthetic features, and stylistic devices support your view? What are we ultimately invited to understand, and what position are we invited to take up? Also consider whether or not you can name and identify the characteristics of those engaged in duplicitous practices, as well as those whose veracity is unquestionable. Go back and listen to the way that the characters are described and add your own words too. It's also important that you go back and consider what stylistic devices Shakespeare employs to position audiences to understand his perspective on major concepts. How will this help you to enhance your analysis of specific words and phrases as well as the overall characterization?